Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to get to share this week's episode with you. Christina Stathopoulos is an analytics consultant at Google. In this podcast episode, she talks through how she actually leveraged LinkedIn to get Google to reach out to her for an interview. And she talks through that experience, a little bit about her experience with the Google interview, and then also how she's grown her career. So without further ado, let's hear what Christina has to say. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. So I've got a fascinating guest, someone who is a fellow educator slash professor, someone who works at Google, which is a huge deal. And I think the most important thing to me personally, a fellow North Carolinian. So Christina Stathopoulos, how are you doing today?
Very good and very excited to be here with you today. And also my first chance on a podcast hosted out of North Carolina. So I'm super excited to be here.
I feel like before we jump into things, we should talk about the email correspondence that we just had, which was the most southern thing I think I've had via email in quite some time. So if I seem a little frazzled to you guys, it's because my battery charger just shot out 30 minutes before this. So I sent Christina an email saying, hey, I've got to run to Best Buy to go pick up a new charger. And guess what her response was? It was,
It
oh,
was
poor thing.
it was typical Southern Belle response, I think.
You know what? This is actually really topical because I think us Southerners have an advantage when it comes to soft skills because we understand like the subtext and the nuance. Because, oh, bless your heart sounds nice on the surface, but underneath the subtext is like, you're not very smart, are you?
Ooh, bless your heart I don't use because that does have that deeper meaning that only we, I think, can understand. I avoid
Right.
that one. But I felt for you. That's why I had that response.
No, I just read it with such a southern twang. I thought that was hilarious. So cool. I'm really excited. I've also just wanted to meet you for a while. So for purely selfish reasons, I'm glad that I'm getting to talk to you. But let's
Well, of
jump
course,
into the
happy to be
podcast
here.
structure. So what we're going to do five main things. So first, we're going to get Christina to talk about what brought her into the data science analytics space. Then we're going to talk about her interview at Google, which I'm fascinated by. I personally want to hear all about it because you nailed it. You are an analytics consultant for Google. Number three, we're going to touch on the keys to growing your career. Number four, the tools that she uses as an analytics consultant. And number five, just any closing advice and kind of just your thoughts on the analytics space and kind of career advancement. So let's start on that first point. Christina, what brought you into the analytics space?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I would say it's a long story in my case. So I have to rewind it back quite a few years to make all the connections. So really, for me, it started from a very young age. I loved math. It was my favorite subject as a kid. I was that weird kid that loved doing, my math exercises. And this eventually led me into studying an interdisciplinary field with a focus in statistics at NC State, more North Carolina love. Um,
Awesome.
and and after finishing my bachelor's, I then did something completely different and moved abroad to Madrid, Spain. I literally did that within a month of graduation. So I decided to do something different, left everything behind, went to Madrid. And at the start, I was really young with little experience. I was in a foreign country. I couldn't speak the local language. So I had to find a solution to support myself, and I found that I couldn't get a job in my field. I mean, for obvious reasons, being young, didn't speak Spanish at the time. So I ended up finding a niche in the market, and I started off freelancing as a business English consultant. There's a very low level of English in Spain, and this is a huge problem because nowadays business needs to be more present on the international scene. So I started working with business executives, a lot of them C-level, and working on their business English and their presentation skills. Why am I telling you this? Because it ended up being a few years of my life that I was separated from my passion, yes, but it ended up doing a lot for me professionally because I grew professionally and I worked on my communication skills and my presenting skills. So I did this for a couple years, very far away from the data world. And then I eventually went on to do my master in business analytics and big data at IE Business School in Madrid. And from there, I launched myself into the field. And it helped because those years of experience of working with business professionals and working on presentations. At that point, also I had acquired practically Spanish fluency, and then I put that with my data skills, and I got experience at SAS Institute, Nielsen, and finally now Google. And it really all combined to come to this one point where I am today. And also you mentioned that I'm an educator. I also teach in higher education now. I'm adjunct faculty at IE Business School, and I'm also a guest lecturer at another institute called ISDI, both in Madrid. And I'm also a professional international speaker. I've spoken across 8 countries now, and 20 virtually. Now with COVID, it's
Wow.
all virtual. And yeah, but I think all of the pieces ended up coming together quite nicely for me.
Awesome. So the word you just threw out there, which I kind of like, was a magnet for me, is this concept of, you said niche. I would call it niche, which is funny because we're from the same place. But that is fascinating. And I think that that's not something that people think about very much when they're kind of navigating their career. Like, what specific space do you want to be in? Or another way of putting that is, like, you've got a skill stack. So you can speak English and Spanish, analytics, how to present. So that, like, if you get enough skill stacked, you all of a sudden go from, I'm competing with 7 billion people with being able to know business or know how to talk, to 4 or 5 skills where you can be world class. And it sounds like that's where you are right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about world class. That's very, but still, you're right. I mean, you can find this special combination of skills. You can find your niche.
Well, wait, what do you
And
mean not world class? You're like speaking at 8 countries. You've got like, you're working at Google. I mean, I'm very much impressed with you right now. I mean,
I'll accept it. I'll accept it. But yeah, I think that's if you can do that as a professional, it's very powerful. If you can find a very special set of skills, find a combination that's not so common in the market, and you can set yourself up for success.
right. And I would even take that further and say success or opportunities come to you. It's like, I sold insurance for 3 years door to door before I went back to get my MBA. Going and cold calling and knocking on doors is the worst thing in the world. I'm so like, it's really given me an appreciation in that I now have job opportunities like the teaching. So I teach at High Point University and Greensboro College, and now I have consulting clients reaching out to me that I've never had any contact with, just because you kind of make a name for yourself in a very specific niche.
Exactly. So you did something very similar to me, that you ended
Mhm.
up doing something quite far away from your ultimate goals or your passion, but it ended up connecting back to what you really want to do. It helps you.
Right, and I think that that's, not to get like too deep into the psychology of things, but you need to think about like, what is your unique value proposition or your unique set of experiences. And it's awesome that I get to talk to you because you're like living proof of what can happen when you realize, like, all right, this is my specific knowledge, which is, I don't know, are you familiar with Naval Ravikant? Totally mixed that up.
No, no, no. What is it?
So Naval he's a Silicon Valley investor, but he recently did kind of like a little mini podcast called "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." And one of the things he talks about is this concept of specific knowledge, which is your skill set mapped on top of your unique lived experience. So that is like, if you can kind of capitalize and reflect and really digest that and then kind of put that, I mean, there's a branding piece to this of like, I think you and I are probably better than most at putting ourselves out there and branding. I mean, hence we're on a podcast right now. But if you can kind of get those things gathered up together, then that can really just accelerate your career.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we've both shown that can work.
Right. Cool. So all right, and let's get into the second point, which I think is everyone wants to hear about. So the Google interview, how intimidating was that?
It was intimidating, quite intimidating, especially for me because I was doing it in Spanish. So
Oh, wow.
that made it a lot more complicated for me, not being my native language. Um, but regardless, it's your native language or not, it's going to be intimidating. It's notoriously difficult, like most tech interviews. And I'm sure that my experience would very much reflect the experience of a tech interview at any of those top companies. But so my experience, or this would be my opinion in case our listeners want to have some like advice if they're going to go after tech interviews. And from my own experience, I would say the key is, first of all, lots and lots of preparation. This is obvious, but I feel like people do not put in the time that they should have. And when you're working in tech, you can find practice interview questions online and blogs on YouTube to help you practice. So I would say if you get invited into one of these interview processes, give yourself a crash course in interviewing in tech. I mean, dedicate a lot of time with the resources you can find
Uh-huh.
online.
Have you talked to Tina Huang?
No.
Okay, so she's been on the podcast, and well, she won't say it's one of the thing. I guess it's FAANG now, like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, or Google. So she's a
Yeah.
data scientist there.
Yeah.
And she talked about how the way that she prepared for that tech interview, she went to Glassdoor. And there, since it's a big company, and a lot of people have gone through that interview, there are people who are now kind of writing down their experience. So she used that as not only like market research of like what are the types of questions, but then kind of the responses as well.
Yeah. And my experience with Glassdoor is it's a lot more used in the US. So
Oh,
living
okay.
in Spain, I realize it's not so used there, but regardless, it's probably one of the best sources. And then there's lots of other sources you can find people who write blogs on it and YouTube, like I said. But I used a mix of resources of everything I could find online, like tips into the type of interview that for my role, because you also need to make sure you're looking into what role are you interviewing for. Find interview questions that would be relevant for that type of role.
Awesome. So, well, I guess walk us through, maybe even back up. How did you even get the opportunity? Did you just apply on like LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people know it. I was contacted on LinkedIn. So,
Ooh, that is
yeah.
juicy. Wait, why? Wait, did you like, have you talked to the person about that? I'm fascinated, I guess personally, but also on behalf of the audience. What was that like? What was the bait? What was the hook that kind of like brought them to you?
Yeah, and this is probably, we'll probably get into it later because if you're going to ask me about advice for working in the field, I always emphasize the importance of LinkedIn. So building a brand on there and just being active, and for people to associate your name to your field. In this case, for people to associate you to analytics or data. And the person I got contacted just because my activity on LinkedIn and kind of they connected my name to analytics and data, and they reached out to me and said, we have an opening on our team and I think you might be good for it. I would love to just chat with you over a coffee, hear about what you're currently doing and see if you might be a good fit for our team. So that started off just a casual chat and then a coffee. From there, I did not get in on the first try. So that process that I entered into, they ended up finding a better candidate. But I didn't let that get me down because you have to realize that you go into these interviews, but just because they don't pick you, it doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It just might be that in that case, for that role, for that team, they found somebody who just fit a little bit better.
Mhm.
So I actually didn't get it on the first try. It took me 2, 3 processes, but the thing was that they liked me from those first interviews, and they said, "Okay, you weren't our first pick this time. We had somebody more qualified for the role, but we want to stay in contact for when we have another similar role opening." And then they ended up having that role opening. They contacted me again, went through the process again, and I eventually made it in.
Wow, I love that
Yeah.
gumption.
But I think, and it's a key also with tech is persistence. Do not get down if you don't get chosen. If you get knocked out the first round, it doesn't matter. Go back and try again, and you're probably going to get better over time because you're going to learn from those interviews and you're going to learn from your experience.
So that's a really interesting concept because that's something that I'm really trying to kind of hammer home with my students, is that you need to look at progress as an iterative thing. It's not like you do all the hard work and then you get one exam. And I think that this is kind of like I don't know, a downside of education, is that they train people to, you study and study and then you have one opportunity. The way that I'm grading my Tableau public portfolios is kind of the way that my consulting kind of engagements work, is that I'll send my client a prototype dashboard, and then they'll study it, maybe work with it, find some insights, and then they'll come back with me and say, hey, add this KPI, drop that chart, change the color here. It needs to be branded. We don't use that logo anymore. And then I'll come back with a new and improved version of it. And sometimes, I mean, these improvements might span, the longest client I've had so far is 4 years. And we've just kind of had these like little iterations, and all of a sudden now they have like a robust analytics reporting platform. So I think that is a mindset that a lot of people need to take on, is that, it's more about sustaining a long-term effort than putting all of your ducks or all of your eggs into one basket and then saying, here, if I don't make it this time, I'm done and I'm going to quit.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say +1 to both sides. So I do something very similar with dashboards that will have like this feedback loop. I try to avoid like the continuous loop, but what I do is offering like in bulk. So I'll make, the prototype, give them the prototype, they give me back feedback in bulk, I incorporate it, and then we might do a revision, every 6 months in case they need to change something. But absolutely, you don't just have one, you don't just launch and that's it. And it's the same in real life, that it's not just one chance, and you need to be persistent, and you need to keep a smile on, your confidence. You're going to have more chances. So don't worry.
Right. I think it kind of, another way of framing that is, you need to take a systems thinking approach to, not only your problem solving, but also your career advancement.
Yeah, of course. Of course. That's how I do it.
Okay. So you got rejected the first time, although maybe I'm putting it too harsh. It didn't quite work out the first time. So how did you get your second opportunity at Google?
So we stayed in touch, like I said, and I recommend this for others. If you do get denied or you don't make it to the next step, that's not a problem. Try to get feedback if you can. It really does matter, depends on the recruiting team and the management, but ask them if they can give you feedback on maybe what you could improve for next time. But anyways, I stayed very positive, asked for feedback, said I was very much interested in case they had another role opening in the future. So we stayed in touch, and they did have another similar role that opened, a few more months down the line. So I entered another process of interviews, and it ended up, working in my favor. I eventually got into Google, but and there's actually a lot more to the story. I entered via like a project-based role, and then I had to interview further to get a full-time position. So I was
Okay.
like a temporary project-based role at the start. I had to find even a way to get in as full time. So there were more processes down the line. So moral of the story is, I didn't get in on my first or second try. You need to keep trying, and it might take you a few more, but I stayed positive throughout, and it got me to where I am today. So no complaining.
Okay. So could you talk about the interview process, or is that, something off limits?
The process, I can't share too much besides, what you would find online, but what I could share is a couple of tips. They're just personal tips from me that I would suggest to others to kind of to stand out from the crowd. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you are ready to sell yourself off of your CV. So have your elevator pitch ready. Because the recruiters, the hiring team, they're going to read your CV, of course. They might read your LinkedIn. But if you go into the room and they tell you, okay, tell me about yourself, what are you going to say? You got a couple minutes to sell yourself. So be ready to take advantage of those couple minutes, to not just be rephrasing exactly what's on your CV. Take advantage of those minutes and say what's not so obvious about your journey, your path, because this is your first impression, and we all know that first impressions are key. They last.
Will you give us an example? So I think the
Oh, you
audience.
cannot put me on the pit. You cannot put me on the
No,
on the
no,
spot
no,
like
no.
that. I don't know. And this is something that you have to practice. So if I had known you were going
Really?
to ask me this today, I would have practiced and made a killer one.
Well,
Um,
okay. Well, I feel like that is a signal into itself. So
what do you mean?
this is not a casual thing. It's not
Oh
like
no.
something that you come off the cuff. It's something that do you have any thoughts on like how did you write yours?
A lot of like I said, this is something that you need to practice a lot and put a lot of thought into. How are you going to make yourself sound special and make yourself stand out, and
Mhm.
also just to start off on the right foot with the recruiter, because you don't want to literally repeat what is on your CV. You can say what's on your CV, but another way of doing it, connect the dots. And then also, and this was another tip that I was going to give, so I can kind of connect it into the second tip, and that is to find yourself a way to stand out from the candidate pool. So I know you probably have a strong professional experience, or a great, strong education. But even with a strong background in both senses, what else can make you stand out if all of the other candidates also have strong experience and a strong education? Because that's typical when you're
Right.
applying in tech. So it can be anything like a volunteer initiative or a startup or a side project, but something that can help that team remember you, and also show them that you have a passion for something, to kind of bring the human side of things. So even in that elevator pitch, depending on what it is, you might be able to throw it into there, and it might not be something that you've highlighted so much on your CV, but something that could make them remember you.
Do you want to critique mine?
Sure, tell me.
Okay, so
Well, for
I'm
me,
not
yours is the podcast, for one. This podcast is like a side project for you, and it shows you have a passion for analytics, right?
right. Well, I'm doing like so many different things right now. Because well, okay, this is my like pitch when I'm like at a networking event, which oh boy, do I miss those. Just being alone. I mean, I will say this: the Zoom calls are fun because I get to like really unpack, and I feel like I'm thinking out loud. But what I typically say, and especially if someone who's like non-technical, is I'll if I'm and this is if I'm feeling like cutesy and like kind of I'll be like this is what I'll say. I'll say I make I essentially make picture books for influential adults.
See, this
Is
is
that
really good.
is that too
So
much?
you put some humor into it,
Right. But I mean, it's
which
only, and then it asks, they're like, wait, what do you mean? I was like, okay, well, so if I'm sitting down with a CFO, he's not going to want me to just dump data and data and data and insight and all this. He's going to want me to say, this box is bigger than this box. So you should do this thing.
yeah. No, I love yours. So you decided to go the humor route. And I'll tell you that, considering that mine was in Spanish, I did not go the humor route because I
Oh,
was
right.
not going to try humor in another language. But in this case, yeah, it's great. And also, it also depends on you kind of need to get a feel for the person that you are interviewing with.
Yeah, that's true. Which is a point that like so we literally, as of this morning, which it's Tuesday, November 24th, the time we're recording this. I just dropped an episode where Kenji critiqued one of my Greensboro College students' analytics portfolio.
Hmm.
And what was really cool to see there, and this happened organically, is that my student Connor Brown is on the golf team at Greensboro College, and Ken played golf in college as well. One of the visualizations was about golf stats for the Greensboro College team. So there was like there was the technical aspects, which Connor did a bang up job of like branding it. He like used Photoshop to get all the people in a picture, and it was like the logo was there. But then also too, they like started talking about golf stories, which Ken had a hilarious anecdote about one of his teammates and when he was in college was like really aggressive and they got into a fight in the golf course or something. Well, not Ken. He fought some other guy, which I think that personal connection now is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think it can be. It can be. So then that sprouted from something that might not be so obvious on the CV. I mean, it
Mhm.
depends how they get to that point, but that point in common could come from something not so typical.
Right. Okay. So the first tip is know your
Preparation.
know. Oh, I thought you were going to say elevator pitch. I guess that okay. That's elevator pitch is a sub point of
Yeah.
Prepare.
Yeah.
Prepare.
Prepare is like the number one. Prepare. From there, there's little points. You have the elevator pitch and finding that extra thing that makes you special, that makes you stand out.
Okay, so that's like your unique value proposition.
Yeah, that could be. It could
Could
be.
be.
But or it can just be a bonus because it might not be directly related to analytics, let's say. If you're interviewing for an analytics role, but something that shows your human side.
Right. Well, I would say it's a value proposition to say this person's really likable, and I could see
Or that.
myself
Yes.
working 40 hours a week with them.
Yes. This is
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's wait. What? Now I'm confused. So the first one's preparation. Are we still on the preparation phase?
No, it's that's preparation is everything, but within it,
Okay.
prepare your elevator pitch and also prepare your unique value proposition.
Okay.
So that's my biggest tips that I think can help a lot.
Right. Which I don't know. I feel like I don't really prepare. I feel like what I'm doing all the time is kind of like expanding my personal brand, like being like I'm on the board of I'm the treasurer for a local nonprofit that promotes localism. So I got to work with the former CFO of Wrangler Jeans on my finance committee. So like that it was like fun, but also a very cool and interesting experience that I could talk about. Because then I was basically getting to see how he thinks about finances
Yeah.
firsthand working with the small nonprofit.
And see, this is another extra thing that you do that is outside of your core work, but it shows just that you have a passion for other things. It shows your human side and what you really like to do with your time.
Right.
And this is all just my opinion, but I think it helps you stand out
Yeah.
as a candidate, that you're not just the typical one. I went to this university. I have 5 years of experience doing this. Yeah, you and how many other people? So what makes you stand out from that pool of candidates?
Would you say that's really common?
What do you mean?
So I've come to the realization that I live in a very small bubble. I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, and all of my friends have a master's degree and their own business. Well, or if they don't have a master's degree, they are like, I mean, one of my friends is a very successful entrepreneur. Only has a high school education. He's kind of like self-taught, but like the circle of people that I'm around are not typical. Is that a lot? Is that a big subsection of the population that just kind of do like the vanilla version of it? Like went to school and now I'm here and they're kind of bland?
I mean, I don't know if I would say such negative words, but to I would say strive to be different. So don't be like all of your friends in your bubble. I can say the same, that I've seen a lot being from North Carolina and seeing the people around me. A lot of them have followed very similar paths, where I, on the other hand, just did, whatever I felt like doing, and left the country and traveled the world. And I was like the only one. So whatever path you can find, but I think it does help to strive to be different and stand out from this pack.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you have any like advice or tips on, I mean, how would you phrase that? How to embrace your passions, or how to pursue your passions in a way that is not, I guess, is self-serving in a way that kind of improves your brand.
Yeah, so always keep in mind that brand, like you said, it's very important, building upon your brand. Find your passions. A lot of people maybe are not so sure of what their passions are.
Mm-hmm.
So find them, and you and I have the common passion of analytics. And but that's very typical in the field of analytics. So within analytics, what other passion can you have to make you stand out from the analytics pack? For
Yeah,
me, for example, I branded my passion for reading and books. So I host,
exactly.
yeah, I
Plug
host.
it. What's your challenge? Plug it right now. The audience can join you on this book odyssey that you've embarked upon.
Okay, so I will sell it. So I host the Book a Week challenge on LinkedIn, and I've been doing this for years. And I started it because I noticed that everybody was so addicted to their screens. And it was kind of an initiative to help others get rid of bad habits, like being on your screen all day, and pick up good habits, like getting lost in a book. So I have for years dedicated myself to reading a book every week, and I share that on LinkedIn with my network, and I encourage others to do the same. and to try to strive for this book a week challenge. And just because reading, it's healthy for you, and you learn, and you don't have to necessarily be reading educational books. What I do is every week I try to change genres. So it might be something educational, then it's sci-fi, then it's historical fiction, but always changing and just getting exposed to different things. So this is one thing that I kind of do outside of my typical career that helps me establish a brand for something different.
Can I unpack this a little bit? Because I have
Yeah, go
thoughts.
for it. Go for it.
So I think the key to making sure that what you're spending your time and your energy in actually improves your brand is the communal aspect to it. So like what you're doing is you're sharing it on LinkedIn, and people can join you. So that's demonstrating leadership skills. You're showing that like I can push an initiative out there and I can get buy-in from people. I think that is like that really sends a strong signal. And I don't mean to like pull everything back to an interview, but I mean we're still in point 3, which is the Google Analytics interview. So you're building a community, and you're showing leadership skills. Also, too, I would say a secondary benefit of that is that can help you get discovered.
It
That's
can.
probably
It
what got you
absolutely.
discovered, right?
A lot of people remember me by this challenge, or people will reach out to me and say, "Oh, I've been following you. I love this challenge of yours. Thank you so much." So I make a lot of connections for that. And then one thing that you didn't mention that's also very important is by doing something like this and being public about it. Yes, it does help with your brand, but it also helps with like self accountability. So what if one
Mm,
week I don't read a book? Then I almost feel like I've let down
right.
myself and my network and my community. So it like forces me to make sure I hit my goal. Because if not, I feel bad, not just for myself, but now I've let down my community.
Yeah, I hate that about myself, that I will never be late for a meeting. But if I set a personal goal of like I'm going to, I don't know, lose 5 pounds this month, maybe. It depends. Although I will say this, I've been so stressed lately, or this semester, that it's been hard for me to eat. So I've been going out to eat and just like
Eating
that's an excuse.
food is a weakness when I come home to the US. So I understand.
Well, okay, I'm in a very unique position because pulling it back to kind of that like tribe of people. So one of my best friends and my roommate is actually he's got a master's degree in bionutritional medicine and put me on an elimination diet, and now he cooks all my meals. So like I'm not tempted by the southern food.
Wow.
So I've got like a very specific tailored diet. But it's not like, you're right, that like fried food and sweet tea is just like
Sweet tea,
it's
sweet tea.
all around me. But all right, so do you have any other thoughts on the Google interview?
No, that would be my biggest tips, and that's what I also,
Mhm.
when people ask me, those are kind of the things that I suggest. And it's just personal opinion, but what I think can really help you stand out. And then the preparation is just key. I mean, without that, and I mean hours and hours, lots of preparation.
Right. But
Yeah,
thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, these are like golden nuggets of insight. You know, this is
you're welcome.
I I'm enjoying you and just talking with you because I also love traveling too. I've been to like Latin America a lot, so I feel like I can connect with you on like multiple levels. But also too, like I'm getting to share this conversation with my audience, and I feel like that they might, nail their Google interview because of you. Just so
Well,
cool.
hopefully so. Hopefully so. Hopefully it helps.
So, what tools are you using right now? Google Analytics.
No, I mean a little bit, but not so much. It depends on the
Mhm.
role. So it really, it changes a lot. But I would say personally, so I use a lot of internal tools, and I use them to do things like, pulling data and automating reports. But it's usually always using a variant of SQL. And
Okay.
that's, yeah, a lot of SQL. And that's actually the number one skill that I say data analyst or data scientist, it's a great starting point, and it's just an all-around great skill to have. You need to learn SQL. I actually did a talk about it a few weeks ago at a conference about why SQL is here to stay. So for me, that's a core skill. And then other things that I use, so I use BigQuery, which is part of the Google Cloud Platform. And then for data visualization, I use Data Studio. So another reporting tool, but in the Google ecosystem. And in the past, I used a lot of SAS. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with SAS, but it was founded in North Carolina.
I was about to
So
say the
another,
SAS Institute in NC State.
yes, exactly.
I don't know. I was taught analytics in my master's program through SAS.
Yeah,
Um,
I learned statistics and statistical modeling through SAS.
right. I much prefer Power BI and Tableau, but I mean I guess that's a personal preference.
Yeah, now I haven't used in a few years, but I do have a lot of experience in the past with SAS, and then of course the typical R and Python.
Oh, cool. So you're a coder. I'm like coding illiterate. I can do a little bit of what I can do is I can copy and paste SQL code and like make it work within Tableau if I have to do like a create some type of dynamic, I don't know, calculated field or something. But
Well, I would say, like I mentioned before, learn SQL, learn some solid SQL coding from scratch.
okay, this is interesting. I'm realizing that I don't have to do that. The audience absolutely, if you're looking to get a full-time analytics job, you should know SQL. I'm realizing though that I can subcontract people who are experts in coding.
That's true. That's a completely, and in the
Right.
position that you're in as well,
Mm,
you can do that. So you don't necessarily have to do it. But I would say somebody just entering the field or trying to get their first role,
mhm.
it would be a key. But you're right that what you've been doing recently, because I've read about your post online, that you're subcontracting this. So it's true that you necessarily might not need to learn it now.
You're talking about the general you of the people the people who are, oh, how do you say, how trying to get an analytics job, maybe like the podcast audience.
Exactly.
Um, but no, so that has been a pretty interesting experience, and it's kind of been a paradigm shift in my mind of, well, I mean, actually, this is kind of an interesting concept. You've heard of Peter's principle, right?
No.
So Peter's principle is this like psychological concept of if you're good at, okay, let's root it down in the analytics space. If you're good at Excel, then you're going to get promoted to a Tableau job. If you're good at Tableau, you get promoted to a senior Tableau. If you're good at being a senior Tableau analyst, then you get promoted to management. So essentially, you get promoted to your level of incompetency,
And then you get stopped.
and then you stop. Right. I'm realizing that I need to focus my time on figuring out how to communicate more effectively, how to sell clients, and then also too how to manage projects, which is a completely new skill set for me. So me going and spending my time learning SQL or learning R or Python or one of those other things would not be the best allocation of my time. And I think that this is something that a lot of people getting analytics jobs haven't even thought about. Like, how are you allocating your time and your energy advancing your specific skill set, or you know applying for jobs or meeting people or socializing.
Yeah, I think so. What we're talking about here is that not everybody needs to get good at coding. This is why it's important to find your passion if you can. I mean, at the beginning it might be kind of hard to navigate the landscape, but depending where you want to go with this, because you also have a lot of people who are very much focused in data visualization, for example, and now with all the tools on the market, why do you need to code? I mean, you can do everything drag and drop.
Right.
It's more a bit about, user experience and design and color theory. So you might focus on that side and not so
Mhm.
much on the coding. And yet data visualization is a very important part of analytics. So it does very much depend on where you ultimately want to go with this. But a general understanding would be to try to pick up coding if you can, unless you're okay with having those doors closed on you. So any
Right.
roles that require it,
That
then you're not going to be ready for that.
it's that's going to limit at least specific trajectories within the
Exactly.
analytics space, which I'm totally fine with. Because what I kind of come to the realization of, do the things that are fun that make you money, and that's ultimately that's long-term sustainable.
Yeah, and don't force yourself to code if you don't like it. I mean, don't
Right.
do something that you don't enjoy. That's why we talked about finding your passion.
Right. That's a really good point. All right,
Yes.
I feel like we have rambled on for so long. So okay, so the tools you use, point four of this talk, is that you use SQL, number one, SQL. Everyone, if you're listening right now, go and learn SQL. Number two, BigQuery, and number three, Google Data Studio.
Yes.
All right, so now let's
Exactly.
move into kind of closing remarks. What words of wisdom do you have for the audience?
Yeah, so a bit more than what we've already discussed. I would say one of the first things that I always, and I touched about on this before, it's don't underestimate the power of networking. We talked about how powerful LinkedIn can be. So of course, be active on LinkedIn, sell your brand. And then besides that, like attend local events, meet other professionals in the field, locals that are working in this, try to make connections. And if you feel prepared enough as well, be a speaker or participate in panel discussions. But just, take advantage of the network that you have and use it to your advantage. So that's one thing is networking. I always very much push the importance of that. And then another thing would be continuous learning. So, working in analytics, working in tech, I cannot stress this point enough because the field is constantly changing one day to the next. You need to stay on top of things. So, get into the habit of continuously kind of upgrading your skills, or at least understanding what's going on out there in the market so you don't get left behind. And then, of course, this continuous learning point really connects well into my book a week challenge. That it can it can help you as well to read books. There's lots of books, especially fun books, related to the data and analytics space. And there's new ones every year. So read the latest ones that are being published to kind of get an idea of the latest use cases and applications and what experts in the market are saying, is going to happen 5-10 years down the line. And a great way to do that is just reading books.
Wow.
Yeah.
Christina, thank you so much. This is amazing.
You're welcome. You're very
So how can
welcome.
they
Thank
find
you.
how can they find you?
Thank you. What?
I said, how can they find you?
Ah,
LinkedIn?
the most active, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can follow my book challenge, book a week challenge as well, and stay in touch there. And thank you so much for having me on today. Very
Of
fun
course.
conversation.
Oh, you're welcome.